Welcome to Tales from the Trenches Tuesdays. Today, it is my absolute honor to have Matt Lang with me all the way from Australia. Matt has worked for some of Australia's most iconic and enduring charities, including the Salvation Army, Royal Children's Hospital Foundation, Lifeline Queensland, and the Mater Hospital Foundation. Service to the community is in Matt's DNA. Prior to commencing in his role as head of fundraising and marketing for the variety of the Children's Charity Queensland, Matt pioneered the role of fundraising manager at the Brisbane Broncos and the first full-time role of its kind in the National Rugby League. During his 3 years at the Broncos, he helped the club meet and exceed its capital campaign target for its new training and community center. Matt believes that humanity's search for meaning can be found in great philanthropy and is focusing the remainder of his career on helping people create their own magnificent legacy. So welcome, Matt.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Jack.
I think it would be best if we just really delved into some of the similarities and differences between fundraising in North America or Canada and fundraising in Australia. So one of the questions I kind of tend to ask folks is, how was philanthropy spoken about around your dinner table growing up? And then with that in mind, do you think those discussions are different than they are here in North America?
Yeah, okay. Oh, look, interesting question. And the idea of the question being framed around was philanthropy spoken about around the dinner table growing up? And the answer to that was yes, absolutely. In fact, it was kind of lived almost, if you like, around the dinner table, in that my parents were Salvation Army officers during a career of more than 40 years as Salvation Army officers.
Wow.
And so we would, as part of that work, they would come into contact with lots of different people. And it was very, very, very common for us, Jack, to have lots of different people sitting around our dinner table having a conversation. If there was someone who didn't have a family to go to or a meal to be had, their mum and dad would often invite them to come back to our place. So we got to live and breathe philanthropy and that idea of giving around the dinner table. But I think probably where you sort of want to spend a little bit more time beyond that, I guess, tangible example is, I guess, what were the things that shaped my experience, I guess, growing up of giving and philanthropy. And look, I guess I could probably best sum it up, and I touched on my parents' life's work or vocation in the Salvation Army. And one of the things, I guess, William Booth, who was one of the co-founders of the Salvation Army, I remember reading a story about him where someone asked him towards the end of his life, how would you sum up your life's work or your life's mission, if you like? And he answered it with one word, and that was others. His mission in life was about others and being in the service of others. And so that, I guess, ethos was role modeled to me right from very, very early on in my life. And so, whether it was giving to others ourselves or encouraging others to give to support other people in need, it was very much, evident and visible within our family context right from the start. My dad, as a good salvo officer, and I'm not sure if you have it in Canada. I know in the US that they have what they call like the kettle, I think it is, and
that's right,
salvo, the kettles, and they're out sort of ringing bells and whatnot, and people throw money into the kettle. So some of my most fond memories as a sort of 4 and 5 year old child was standing next to my dad, kind of in malls here in Australia with our version of, I guess, the kettle, and Dad would be encouraging other people to help the salvos, to help other people, and so I kind of, as I said, grew up very much with philanthropy and fundraising really visible within my life right from an early age. So I got to see a great fundraising practitioner, if you like, in my dad right from an early age. So I kind of was almost some kind of destiny, I think, that I would end up a fundraiser, even though early on in my professional career, that wasn't my intention to pursue that path.
Of all the people I've met in my almost 30 years of fundraising, you are the first second generation fundraiser I've ever met.
Yeah, wow.
So that is absolutely amazing. Most people kind of fall into it off, they're doing something off the side of their desk for a little bit, whether it's, running an event or whatever. But good on you. Wow.
Yeah.
Second generation. It's a unique title to have.
Yeah. Well, my parents and my dad in particular, as I said, they were Salvation Army officers for 40 years and were in lots of different positions, senior leadership positions. At one point, Dad headed up the Salvation Army for Australia and the South Pacific. So in a bunch of different roles, but probably half of that 40 years he spent in public relations or fundraising roles. So he was very gifted in that space, and probably, if I take a moment to self-reflect, probably some of that skill and that, I guess, enthusiasm for philanthropies, rubbed off on me along the way, obviously.
Apparently, yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, as Australia and Canada are both Commonwealth countries, the next question is kind of timely. The future of philanthropy will likely be very different than it is today. Part of the change is addressing systemic inequalities that have existed and may still exist today for many racialized communities. In Canada, there's been a conscious shift towards fundraising for Indigenous causes, stemming out of what we had, the Truth and Reconciliation Report. We had residential schools up until actually the mid-'80s.
Right.
So there's a huge kind of pushback now to kind of try and right some of those wrongs that are there. So how do you see that being mirrored in Australia?
Yeah, look, well, I guess we're going through a very similar process in Australia at the moment. There's currently or upcoming a referendum on constitutional recognition of Indigenous or First Nations Australians in the Constitution, and some other changes or looking at some other options as to how to give First Nations people, I guess, a greater say in terms of, policy and legislation and things that impact their lives. So it certainly is very topical, and there is a big focus. I was fortunate in a recent role to actually for Lifeline, which I guess is a suicide and crisis prevention line here in Australia that's quite well known and quite common. And we were able to secure some philanthropic funding from a trust and foundation to actually develop an Indigenous crisis line, so that there was actually Indigenous or First Nations people that were trained and suitably qualified to take those crisis calls, rather than those calls being answered by non-Indigenous people. So it was a really exciting project to be part of, and I guess that's a very to circle back to your question, there absolutely is, I guess, appetite from funders and supporters that want to work towards, greater support for First Nations Australians.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, we certainly see it in many of our social service charities here in Canada. So, food banks were hit very hard during the pandemic, but even more so in the Indigenous community. So, I think that there's a lot of Canadians and a lot of strategies going to try and right those wrongs of the past and make it more of a level playing field, because it certainly hasn't been historically.
Yeah. Well, as I said, similar situation here. And look, these things are complex and challenging, and there's no simple solution. But I think, at a kind of very high level, as long as people are kind of working towards some kind of better future together with sort of open mind and open hearts, if you like. I think, hopefully we can find a better way forward into the future.
Most definitely. Wow. Well, Matt, this has been absolutely amazing. I thank you so much for your time. If folks wanted to get hold of you and to connect with you, what's the best way of doing that?
Yeah, sure. Look, they can get in touch with me via LinkedIn if they just type in, search Matthew Lang, Variety, the children's charity. They'll be able to track me down that way. So that's probably the best way. They can reach me via email as well. Can I give out my email address? Or
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes.
Yes, yeah. Perfect. So it's Matthew with 2 T's .lang, Lang, at varietyqld.org.au.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much. This has been a hoot.
Yeah, no, I've absolutely loved it, Jack. I appreciate you, offering me the opportunity to have a chat to you. It's been fantastic. It's just out of interest, this is my sort of debut podcast. So first time I've been involved in a podcast, so new experience for me, and I've absolutely loved it.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, great.
Hi, folks. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button right here.